So I'm Jennifer Ramirez. I'm with ExxonMobil. I was kind of one of the first developers to get in and start playing with the Corva Dev Center. I built a wait on bit plus one app. It's pretty simple. So I'll be walking you through that today. The purpose of the app was being able to read in data from the WITS data collection, perform some kind of simple manipulation on that data, and then to write it back out and show it in a new data set collection. Eventually, we're going to be showing that in traces, but right now we've still got some updates to that to go. Through this process, I've had a few different learnings. The first learning of development, as well as kind of moving on to different developers. It's best to actually name your new data set collection the same as the backend app, just so it's easy to tell which ones are linked. Had a couple issues whenever I first started and all that. Also, once you set up your app and you select Enhance WITS, that's inherently accessing the WITS collection, and you don't need to include that in your manifest file to read from. So that it's not something that you need to remember to include each time. Additional data like drill string data or any other data set collections that are available for access through the APIs will need to be included in the manifest file though. The last piece is using Postman to actually see the data set collections and get an idea of how the data is populated behind the scenes. And then using that data to mock up your sample data for testing using the local testing framework. In the local testing framework, it's pretty helpful to be able to use that on your development environment. I use it to help me find compilation errors before I deploy to Corva. So just by building it using the Docker build and then running it, it gives you a pretty good feedback on if you've got any kind of compilation errors or syntax errors. And then once you do have everything ready to go and it writes out, it'll actually write out to the output file what you would expect to see in your data set collection within Corva. So at that point, you have an update of, my app's working, and then also are my calculations working as expected. From there, you can reiterate and update the app as needed. From here, I'll go ahead and show you what the code actually looks like. Uh-oh. Yep. All right, let's give that a try.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. All right. So I am working in Azure VM right now, so things might be a little slow to respond. But once you create your app in Corva and you've started working in it, you can actually call different values. So in here, I'm actually calling the wait on bit. So this is me accessing the Corva data. And nothing too exciting is going on here, but in the next file, of course, it is super slow. There we go. We actually perform our data calculation. And as I said, it is a proof of concept app. So the whole point is to show that we're able to read in the data and then able to write out the data plus one as what we have chosen to a new value. And then we're using the same append that you've seen earlier in demonstrations. So the append includes all of the data that you have to have just in general, so the asset ID, collection, company ID. And then it also includes the data portion, which would be the record that I'm reading in, as well as the record that I've now manipulated. And In the manifest file, this is where you will include any data sets that you need to read or write to. For me, I am just reading and writing to one data set collection, and I'm just using data, so there's no need to call that within my manifest file. For testing, I Postman, if I can get that to pull up for us. So using Postman and using the get and our API key, I'm able to get sample data used with the local testing framework. So just using this data and saving it out to a sample file. Of course, it's slow. This is that same data that we just saw in Postman saved here within our test sources Corva folder. So when you're setting up for the local testing framework, once you've set up your test sources folder, you'll need a Corva folder underneath, and then the file name will need to match what you see here in your Corva ARC file. So it's important to make sure that things match up in naming and that you have the paths correct for the test file and the sample file. I'm not going to actually run the local testing framework, but I'm going to show you what it looks like if I had run it. Ooh, too far up. Of course, it's jumpy with me right now. So if Lambda gets response null, that's good news. That means that everything worked out and that you're not getting any errors in your Lambda function. And then as it writes out, you will actually see the same data or similar data in the file that it writes out for you that you would actually see in your data set collection. So you'll see your asset ID, your collection ID, and then inside of the data collection, you'll see the weight on bit and the weight on bit plus 1. And the way that that actually looks in Corva, you're able to upload your different versions here, and you can see that I had lots of test runs to begin with before I figured out how to use the local testing framework. The stable release denotes that this is your actual working release, and you can toggle between the release that you have just done or a previous release. And then checking out your data set collection, you'll notice that it looks pretty similar to what we just saw in the sample file that we had. So that is my presentation for weight on bit plus 1.